Good afternoon, everyone. See folks joining as attendees in the chat. So we'll let folks join. We'll give folks about 2 more minutes, and then we'll get started with this discussion. But excited to have you all here today. Thanks again for everyone joining us that just came into the discussion. We're looking forward to this discussion on workforce avenues. Thanks again. We're live on Facebook and we'll be on YouTube as well. So we'll give folks about 30 more seconds to get on the call, and then we'll get started. All right, well, let's go ahead and get started. Thanks again for everyone joining us. My name is Winn Decker. I'm our Deputy Director of Higher Education here at the Hunt Institute. I'm excited to be your moderator for today. We've got a great discussion today on access to workforce pathways and creating more equitable systems of workforce pathways. So thanks for being here. We'll dive right into the discussion. We've got some great panelists that I look forward to bringing into it. But I just want to frame the discussion for us just for a moment as we begin this conversation, because it goes without saying that there is a direct link between post-secondary education and workforce pathways, especially in upskilling and reskilling current and future students, as well as adult learners who are reconnecting with the education system. As economies continue to change and fluctuate, we know that this is a time when we need to make sure workforce pathways and avenues are directly connected to the jobs and economy for a state and community. Now more than ever, this workforce advancement is imperative because of the Great Resignation and the Great Reset. Folks are questioning the work they do and where they want to be, and it's our job as leaders in the education system to provide pathways to give people those opportunities. We've got several groups represented today, from state legislatures to those working in the nonprofit sector, to those working to coordinate across different economic groups. So I'm excited to dive into this conversation. But as you can imagine, when we advance the workforce, our lives change and we all win. No puns intended there, but I'm excited for this discussion. So with that, we'll go ahead and get started. Senator Bergen, I want to come to you first. Senator Jim Bergen is from the North Carolina 12th District, includes Harnett, Johnston, and Lee counties. Before joining the General Assembly in 2019, Senator Bergen served 2 terms as a Harnett County Commissioner, including 3 years as chairman. So, Senator, thanks for being here and congrats on your most recent election.
Thank you. Pleasure to be here.
We're glad to have you. Can you just start us off by telling us a little bit about how North Carolina's post-secondary institutions, what they get right when it comes to advancing workforce production?
Well, I actually serve on a community college board also. I have was vice chair of it, stepped down as vice chair, but I'm still finance chair and will be on it till 2025. I'm the only member of the legislature that serves on the board of a community college because they extended my term so long so I could stay on there because I'm passionate about education. And I think we need to encourage everybody to be lifetime learners. Some of the things that I think employers are looking for is people with a good work ethic that'll show up and can learn. I've shared this before, but the last time I checked, IBM, 50% of their jobs that they had advertised did not require a college degree. So there's a lot of jobs that are out there for people that have some additional training, if not a full college degree. But I went to the University of Tennessee, graduated from the University of Tennessee, and I'm getting that plug in there because we actually are playing football good again, although we had a little hiccup against Georgia. But education is just, it is so important to your not only your quality of life, but your ability to grow equity and things like properties and homes. And we have got to get folks additional training, and we're working on a big project. I don't know how much you want me to get into it now, but we're working on a big project to talk about how to get people that are on Medicaid and other government programs additional training and so that they can come off of those programs, because I'm a firm believer that people are the happiest when they're able to take care of themselves and their families. So thank you for letting me be here. And it's always a pleasure to participate on one of the Hunt Institute programs.
Well, we really appreciate all the work you do in this space, and for your commitment to education. You're exactly right in terms of the economic impact for the individual and their family, the return on income, the wealth building, the ability to set yourself up for a successful future. And like you said, we see that happen for all those that pursue any form of post-secondary education that doesn't necessarily have to be an associate's degree or a 4-year degree. There's a lot of payoff for that. So appreciate you highlighting that.
Thank you.
Well, great. I want to come to Kelly Middleton Banks next. Kelly is the Director of Programs and Initiatives for the National Association of Workforce Boards. Kelly, thanks for joining us today. I want to dive into the Workforce Innovation and Opportunity Act. It was passed in 2014 and really sought to help job seekers access employment, education, training, and support services so they could thrive in the labor market. Can you talk to us a little bit about how this legislation impacted workforce development across the nation?
Absolutely, and I'm so happy to be here with Senator Bergen and Nate Humphrey, who you'll hear from shortly. With WIOA, the Workforce Innovation Opportunity Act that passed in 2014. If you take a quick step back and look at the Workforce Investment Act of 1998, it had been 16 years that the system had been operating underneath WIA. So WIOA was a huge step and reevaluating the system and kind of really looking at how best can the system meet the current needs and demands moving forward. So when you think about the Workforce Investment Opportunity Act of 2014, what it did was it better aligned the federal investments to enable the public workforce system to serve both employers and job seekers. If you work within the system, and I'm a true believer that it's not just workforce boards, it's higher education institutions, it's community-based organizations, it's a variety of stakeholders that are part of the system. You're working with two entities. You're trying to meet the job seekers' needs for skills attainment, but you're also trying to help and support industry and employers. So it really encourages the WIOA Act, really encourages a collaboration and flexibility to meet the needs of local economies. You can see this happen through the focus on career pathways and sector partnerships. That's a key part of WIOA to help fill the in-demand occupations, as well as to address the skills attainment for job seekers. It also allowed for an increased investment in the evidence-based and data-driven pieces to maintain accountability for the investment from WIOA. So standardizing performance measures across core programs and establishing primary indicators for credential attainment, skill gains, and effectiveness of services to employers. And that's a key part to ensure that the investment through WIOA is those that are actually meeting the needs and demands of those local communities. It's also had an opportunity to strengthen the governing boards of this investment. So the local, state, and regional boards that are responsible for the federal investment that's coming into these local regions. So it not only provided more flexibility for these boards, but also allow them to be more nimble in their ability to meet the regional and economy's unique needs. And it also centralized a lot of the services through the one-stop centers. You all may be familiar with them as AJCs, or American Job Centers, creating a central point for individuals to access the services that's provided through WIOA. So WIOA really did, take WIA from 1998 and bring it into some of the 21st century. There's still some things that I think, as we've gone through the last couple of years under WIOA, that different entities are starting to examine how best can we serve the needs of people as well as industry right now. And I think the pandemic has also brought to light, some areas where there's opportunity, but that's really what has allowed for a lot of the growth and expansion of workforce development and the flexibility that WIOA was able to present.
That's excellent. I really appreciate that overview, Kelly. It's important to understand how we got to where we are in terms of how we're building these systems and moving forward. I want to bring Nate into this conversation, but Kelly, I'm going to ask you a follow-up just really quick that you kind of sparked in my mind. You mentioned high demand jobs a couple of times. I mentioned it in my intro. How are regions and communities identifying what those high demand jobs are?
Well, one of the ways they do that is through the labor market information that workforce boards access. That's one of the key areas in which workforce boards try to identify what the high demand jobs are in a region. They also are working with employers and industries regularly. And also your workforce development boards are predominantly business led. The members of those boards are businesses, and so they really lean in on those individuals to help inform, what's happening on the ground and where the most high demand occupations are. It's been really exciting to see a lot of new emerging industries coming into play, and areas and regions that may have not in the past been engaged in these. Semiconductor work in New York. There's quite a bit in Arizona that's happening, Ohio. And so, but those high demand occupations, really are leveraged through the labor market information and the continual conversations and relationships that these entities build with the industries in their region.
That's great. Thank you so much for that. And the relationship portion is so critical. We in higher ed, we oftentimes throw around a lot of buzzwords, and I think one of those is high demand, high quality jobs. And so just really wanted to put some structure behind what we're talking about there. So I appreciate you being willing to go off the script a little bit and answer that for me. I appreciate that. Nate, I want to bring it to you. Nate Humphrey is the Associate Director of Communities of Practice for Jobs of the Future. Nate, really appreciate you being here. And first off, congrats on this role. We're excited to see you there. JFF, they really work to drive or transform the American workforce and education system, but through achieving equitable economic outcomes for all. Can you tell us a little bit about how your role, the role in post-secondary institutions have in ensuring that our workforce has adequate representation from all?
Hi, Winn, and thanks for having me today. It's definitely a pleasure to be with everyone and to be joining this panel in particular, and to be invited to speak on such a critical topic at a real inflection point in our country's history, especially when it comes to workforce development and really meeting those rapidly transforming labor market needs. Post-secondary institutions have been at the heart of preparing our country's workforce since before our country was even founded, with community colleges having played an active role in that certainly over the last century. And while that's a proud history, we also know that not all students and communities have been well served by those institutions historically. The nation's 4,400 post-secondary institutions include nearly 1,600 community colleges, and I really think that now is the time for us to make sure that our institutions are reflecting our communities that we are serving, both in terms of the student populations, but also in terms of our own faculty and staff at our institutions, so that we can reflect those communities. And that also means building campuses that can support those individuals while they are employed there. This was, of course, a core principle that was addressed in the Dallas Herring lecture that happened earlier this week at NC State, and was certainly a fascinating one to be listening in on. But I think really this comes down to some really simple economics. The American labor market is tightening. Demographically, we know that the only way that we can meet employer demand for workers is to better serve communities that we've traditionally not well served or seen represented well in post-secondary institutions. Critically, though, I think that our literature tells us time and again that our students do best when they are being served by an institution that reflects them and reflects their lived experiences. And I think we can all, on a personal level, relate to that as well. We certainly have benefited historically from those that have taken interest in us and shown that mentorship. And so making sure that our institutions can provide that level of an environment is going to be a critical piece to meeting those workforce needs as well.
Yeah, thank you for that, Nate. You know, you brought up the Dallas Herring lecture. I was fortunate enough to be there to hear Dr. Flores really talk about that economic, that growth in the ability to utilize our community colleges as that economic driver. So appreciate that. And for those of you that might not know, the Belk Center, who is, we like to claim, a cousin of the Hunt Institute, we work close with them, just recently held the lecture. So please be on the lookout. That was recorded and they'll be publishing that in the near future as well. But thank you for that, Nate, and great to have you here. Well, awesome. I want to remind the audience that we do have some time for Q&A at the end of this. So please feel free to use the Q&A feature at the bottom of the webinar to submit any questions you have. And we'll be sure to get to those in just a little bit. But Senator Bergen, I want to come back to you. We've talked a little bit about this idea of you know, the Great Reset, Great Resignation, folks really thinking about what role they want to be in, if they want to reskill or upskill. And we know that North Carolina has been doing a lot of great work, including being named the #1 state for business in large part due to some of the work that you all are doing in the state legislature. But from a policy perspective, what changes do you feel our current workforce must undergo to continue to attract a variety of employees, both in-state and from out of state?
You know, we're doing some of those things. One of the bills that I ran and we passed was to allow adjunct professors in K-12 system. And the way the bill was designed was and I did it after talking to some CPAs. A few years ago, we passed a bill that said that we were going to teach financial literacy in high school. Well, who better to teach it than a retired CPA? But a lot of these folks didn't want to go to get a 2-year teaching certificate to be able to go back in and teach something that they knew everything about. So what the bill says, they can go to a community college. Here again, I use the community colleges because I think they're a great vehicle. They can go to the community college, take 1 semester, 3 classes, and now they can go in and teach. So I had a lady that approached me. She had her doctorate in chemistry, had worked in industry, wanted to go into a high school and teach chemistry, and they told her she could. Now, can you imagine having a chemistry teacher that had worked in industry as your teacher? And I've shared with some of you before, the teachers and instructors and professors I learned the most from were folks that had been in industry and came out, and they gave me my love for business because they told me the stories of how things work and, you know, how you approach real complicated issues and how they dealt with things. And I think that's what I want people to have a passion for learning. I want them to see the excitement that people have that were successful and did it. And I don't know if I'll ever teach. I don't know if I have the patience for some of the discipline issues that people tell me they have to deal with. But you know, I just think, again, we all need to tell and share our enthusiasm of being a lifetime learner. I get up every morning at 6 o'clock and try to read for an hour and a half because I just want to know more. You know, I want to know how to accomplish these things. But a lot of legislation that we're working on now around education, and I won't get into a number of it, but the apprentice programs that we're doing. The governor's actually going to be at Central Carolina next Tuesday. Central Carolina Community College, the college that I spoke that I'm the finance chair of. He's going to be there next Tuesday, and he's there to look at our apprentice program and all the different programs we do with Caterpillar. We have one of the largest programs with Caterpillar where we train their heavy welders for their most profitable plant in the Caterpillar system and the plant that produces the most product. They produce skid steers. They produce, it's amazing to go through this plant and see what they're doing, and to know that a lot of the welders there are community college graduates. So it's just, it's easy to get excited about our community colleges.
Yeah, absolutely. Really appreciate that. And you talking about folks that have industry experience being in the classroom. A perfect example. I'm thinking about my chemistry classes and how you learn a lot, but then you also go to the lab and you get to do the hands-on experience and you get to connect it to the learning that you just did. And so, how are we bringing in teachers? How are we bringing in folks that have that experience and can make that real-world connection for students? So I really appreciate your work on that. Kelly, I want to come back to you and hone in a little bit on this relationship conversation that I think we kind of started on in the first question. But in particular, we hear across the nation that there's a misalignment between what higher education institutions are offering in their curriculums versus what the workforce needs. And so how can we create relationship at the local level between workforce development boards, the workforce, and higher education to ensure students are getting the training they need for the labor force?
That's a great question. And you're absolutely right. I definitely think, as you know, through the research and information out there, that there's a misalignment that is occurring. And I think there's a lot of opportunity for higher education institutions to partner and work with workforce development boards to both be better informed in meeting the needs of employers and industry. It's an interesting thing that I've come across a lot of times when having conversations with individuals in the system and outside, the idea that workforce boards are, although they're responsible for the workforce dollars, thinking that they also are providing the actual training and programming for individuals, and that's not the case. Workforce boards have to partner with education, training providers and higher education institutions in order to make to provide program offerings for job seekers and participants. So higher education is instrumental in the public workforce system. You can't have one without the other in order for the needs of the industry and to scale job seekers to happen. So I think one of the things that can happen in local areas is for workforce boards and higher education institutions to be open to the idea of collaboration and be intentional about the partnerships that they establish. One thing that I've continue to try to promote is to move beyond some of those transactional process and be more collaborative in the efforts. It is very easy for a board to provide funds to a community college or institution to pay for that job seekers training, or that community college to inquire if that's an opportunity to tap into those workforce investment dollars. But how about we go beyond that transactional process and really have some real conversations and build real relationships in order to understand where the demands are for industry and help inform the program offerings that are at these institutions in order to be better reflective of what those demands are. And I think that goes a step further than what some relationships can evolve to. And so I think, honestly, with workforce boards are continually in conversation with industry. That is the other other customer that they serve. So they're a great resource for information, and they can be a great convener as well to provide that information to help inform what program offerings are happening at a higher education institution. I think also that there's opportunity for higher education institutions to, if they haven't already, apply for the eligible training provider list so that they can be able to access those WIOA dollars that are coming into their community. They can also become a board member on the Workforce Development Board. There's quite a few post-secondary institutions that are part of the board and they have an access to industry through that way. They also help guide the investments that are coming into the community. But it really does come down, I think, to building stronger and better relationships and moving beyond some of those transactional experiences into a space where we're being more collaborative, we're being more coordinated, and we're being more intentional with integrating one another in the conversations that are happening to help move beyond some of the unfortunate bottlenecks to really be able to meet their employers' demands.
Yeah, thank you for that. I love hearing you say move past the transactional, because we know it's more than just a one-to-one. It's more about that relationship. It's about the continual connection to really make that difference. And as a former higher ed employee, you said be open and flexible. And I know there's probably a lot of higher ed people that first, kind of, tighten up for a second, because we're not always the best of that in higher ed. But in today's time and today's economy, we know that flexibility is incredibly important. So thank you for naming that.
Winn, you all are getting better.
Yes, ma'am.
I am
Well,
seeing some really good innovation out there between community college and workforce boards. So it definitely has come a long way. I'm excited to see what the future holds.
awesome. Well, we're glad to hear it. Before I come to you, Nate, just want to remind the audience again quickly that we will take some Q&A after this question with Nate. I already see someone submitted one, but feel free to use that Q&A function at the bottom of your Zoom webinar. But Nate, want to come to you with a question. We've talked about, we throw around a lot of buzzwords, and I think one of those is reskilling and upskilling employees. We often talk about it, but I don't know that everyone fully understands it, or that we have the same definitions. So can you just talk to us a little bit about what reskilling and upskilling is and what it means to JFF?
Yeah, I think that's a fantastic question there, Winn, and I certainly think it's important given the context of this conversation. When we think about workforce development, we often can jump straight into thinking about a student that's new, or an individual who's new to the workforce, or someone who's been what we love to call in the workforce system a dislocated worker, right? Someone who was in the system or working and fell out of that job, and really that's those individuals coming back then to a post-secondary institution. Reskilling and upskilling are two really critical strategies and approaches to ensuring that existing workers and employers can remain competitive and are able to keep their edge in an ever-evolving marketplace. These efforts prevent that costly dislocated worker step within the greater labor market system that we so often think about when we think about the services of a workforce system, or the role of the state in supporting those individuals. And from a policy and an employer perspective, these two approaches really have significant both taxpayer savings as well as employer savings when it comes to trying to either recruit new talent. By investing in your existing talent, you're able to reduce that cost. And from a taxpayer standpoint, being able to reduce those expenses of working to support an individual while they are out of the labor force, right? Both strategies, again, are drawing on your current or your existing employees, and either prepare an existing employee to take on a new or a different role within the organization, or to move up within their existing functions to a more advanced role. And this can often be due to either changes in functional direction for the company, but often it's due to technology. You get a new press or a new piece of equipment on the machine floor, and you need to make sure that your employees know how to safely operate that. They need those skills, they need that time and investment. There are two states, North Carolina, among those that I think have two exemplar programs that are really worth lifting up in this space. North Carolina has two, both the short-term workforce development work that North Carolina calls continuing education, as well as the customized training program. Both work hand in hand with employers to support this kind of upskilling and reskilling. And then in Washington, the job skills program is a great example of, again, that on-site instruction for employers to be able to reskill or upskill an employee. But uniquely to that program, they require a match, right? And so the state there is sending a very clear message that says that they will invest in the employers that are going to invest in their employees. At JFF, we really support these types of models wholeheartedly, and believe that the cost savings and the benefits there, both for the employee and the employer, are critical, and that employers must engage and invest in their education and career advancement of their current employees. And we work to elevate those types of models. Lots of tools and resources in our resource library on this topic for sure. And I always want to encourage folks to check those pieces out.
Yeah, really appreciate that, Nate. And we frequently lift up JFF's work in this space, some of the in terms of highlighting the best practices that you all are seeing. So I appreciate that. Nate, before we go to Q&A, I'm gonna kind of put you on the spot and ask you another question. But as you were talking about reskilling and upskilling, one of the parts that came to mind was credit for prior learning. I'm thinking about someone that's like military that comes back with experience. How do we turn things like that into credit to make sure that students get credit for the learning they've already done?
Absolutely. And this, again, is another one of those critical pieces in that both, again, related to reskilling and upskilling, that recognition of credit where credit is due, right? And so the opportunity there to seize those moments. Again, my physical head goes into this, how is this going to benefit the full system here? And we're seeing states embrace this wholeheartedly. North Carolina very much included in that, with the State Board for Community Colleges recently adopting their state board code that implements a framework for that to occur across their system. But that, of course, is building on work in Tennessee and Kansas, Washington State, lots of different states that have embraced that model. Again, that comes back to time to credential. And so whether that individual is pursuing an industry credential and recognizing that towards a degree or towards a credit-bearing program, or they're bringing those lived experiences, those portfolio opportunities, that has savings both for the student, the employer, and for the state at public institutions, because you're reducing the number of credits and time that an individual needs to be supported while they're pursuing their education. So wholeheartedly support that. We're seeing lots of innovation, particularly in the nitty gritty, right, of how do you actually review and articulate these pieces. And certainly, I think that the North Carolina community colleges are doing a fantastic job of getting those pieces into place and getting the right folks in the room to make that simpler. One last thing I'll plug on that, though, I think, is that another good piece that North Carolina is working on is their nccareers.org site. And so we're bringing together opportunities for folks to bring forward a credential or choose out an educational pathway or come at it from I'm interested in this job. That site is a great example of where an individual can get information on those credits, those credentials, those pathways. But more importantly, they're then able to see how those pieces start to fit together. And things like the NC workforce credentials provide a great bridge, if you will, for an individual to know what actually matters within the North Carolina labor market and make a more informed decision. So kind of braiding here, if you will, that credit for prior learning with how do you identify strong labor market outcomes for an individual and to give them the information to make an informed decision.
Yeah, that's fantastic, Nate. I really appreciate that. And, I think as a nonprofit, the Hunt Institute, when we're going out and doing some of this work, I think the next step, I guess, for lots of folks on this call is helping to make these more public and more known. Oftentimes these systems are in place in states have done a lot of work, but we don't necessarily transfer that information to the student that could benefit from it. So excited for everyone on there to be able to hear this stuff and be able to take it back to their respective fields. Well, I want to jump into some audience Q&A, and we've had one submitted about early childhood workforces, and so I think I'll split it into a two-part question, maybe. Senator, I think I'll come to you first, and then I'll go back to Nate and Kelly. But we'd love to hear about what North Carolina is doing to hedge this worker shortage in early childhood education. And then maybe Nate and Kelly, I'd love to hear a little bit more about how we're supporting the student aspect of making that connection. So Senator Bergen, what's North Carolina doing to stem this worker shortage in early childhood education?
Well, everybody knows when COVID happened, one of the big things was we had to keep childcare open, because for the folks that were the essential workers, they had to have a place for their children to go. And we saw really quick that we were going to have to supplement those salaries. I think the average childcare worker was making about $12.25, and we had that issue, and then we also had the folks that were dealing with nursing homes and the workers in there. So we've effectively now made the starting wage in there about $15, and that's one of the things that as healthcare and healthcare appropriations that I look at, and I talked to the Secretary of DHHS about, is what happens when that federal money runs out next year and we've got to make it up, because I've learned something being in business. You can't take a raise away from somebody. So, they look at that as basically a raise in their pay. And we can't go back to them and say, well, the COVID's over, all of that's gone, that federal money's gone. Now we're going to put you back to 1225. You talk about people changing livelihoods very quick. They can go to Chick-fil-A and make $17 to $19, and all around Harnett County, which is basically a rural county. I talked to the different folks at the different businesses and fast food places and everything. So we're going to have to deal with that. We're going to have to say these folks have to be paid a living wage and whatever that is. And I'm not concerned about what the minimum wage is, because I think that's irrelevant now. Now it's how do we get quality people? We get them enrolled, we get them trained, and we have this 4 or 5. We have the STAR system for childcare in North Carolina, and that's really a big deal. A lot of parents, that is their tool they use to determine the quality of childcare. They want their children to be in a 4 or 5 star facility, and that has to do directly with training of those workers. How many of them have certificates and degrees and diplomas? So we're relooking at all of that right now, trying to make sure that we have quality people, quality childcare, and that gets right back to what I was talking about. We've got people that are on Medicaid that if we did community college, childcare, and community college training, we could solve a lot of those problems at one time. We could put the childcare at all the community colleges. We could be training workers to work in there and providing the place for those children while their parents are taking courses to become better trained so they can make more money and then take care of them and their kids. So it all goes together, but it's next year is a big problem, because probably come June or July of next year, we're either going to fund it out of the general fund or have to figure out something, because that clock is ticking on that money.
Yeah, and thank you for naming that. That inflection point is not just coming from North Carolina; it's coming across the nation. And so, really thank you through what next steps are there. So I appreciate you naming that. Nate, I'll come to you, and then we'll go to Kelly. But Nate, can you just tell us a little bit about maybe the student side of it, how we can better make these connections for the students that are coming in that might be interested in early childhood workforce, or how we can get people interested in it?
Yeah, I think that's a great segue there. I think that the opportunities that really build on what Senator Bergen was sharing there is that opportunity to work with, early childhood in particular is an opportunity where public actors have, multiple roles along that pathway. And so how can we sit down with both independent childcare providers as well as those that are being publicly run, and begin the process of really mapping out what that educational pathway looks like. What does that career pathway really look like? And then we need to take that a step further. We really need to think through what is that lived experience of the individual that's interested in working in that sector, and then understand what are the barriers that they're going to experience along the way as they are pursuing that workforce pathway, right? With that, I think what we really need to consider and try to understand are opportunities like what Senator Bergen was highlighting, which are earn and learn opportunities, right? So that opportunity to get that real world experience while they are pursuing their educational pathway, ideally that they're earning an income while they're doing that, and then leveraging opportunities for things like in North Carolina, what they refer to as the FNS ENT program, nationally known as SNAP ENT, that can provide, if you're a food recipient, for example, wraparound support services and educational navigation while you're there, and leverage, again, opportunities for federal reimbursement to, again, support that individual. Make sure that the traditional barriers like childcare, transportation, and other issues that can get in the way are getting addressed. Again, tailoring those responses to those identified student experience along those pathways, right? And making sure that the individual is not ending up in a profession where they can't keep a roof over their own head without some form of public assistance. And so I think that that's the other piece to this, and that JFF has spent quite a bit of time on over recent years around how do we begin to understand and define what job quality looks like as well for those educational investments. State resources are very limited, federal resources are limited. How do we make sure that we're building those educational pathways so that those public investments are resulting in an individual who is on their own feet and able to take care of themselves and their families?
Yeah, thank you for that, Nate. I mean, you named this return on investment and the earning while you learn. You know, this is a conversation we're having all the time. You know, we can make the economic argument all you want of you'll increase your income when you go back to work, you'll build wealth and equity over time. But if a parent is having to make a decision between going to school and putting a meal on the table, you know, that's a tough decision for them to make right then. And so how do we make sure that earn while we learn is an opportunity there? So I appreciate you naming that. Kelly, just want to finish this early childhood conversation out with you. What are you seeing at the workforce board level in terms of early childhood?
Thanks so much, Winn, and Senator Bergen and Nate really touched on some really key points that we're seeing. You know, with Nate, the earn and learn model, absolutely, that's kind of what we're seeing across the system. There's workforce boards and local areas that are really examining apprenticeship and looking at the career pathways for early childhood educators, and in how that they can take someone from maybe a child care provider to an early childhood educator, and creating apprenticeships to be able to be reflective of that, to create more sustainable wages for that group. So we're seeing that in Florida, we're seeing that in Michigan, Idaho, Northwest Wisconsin. These particular areas are really starting to explore that. And in that question that the person posted, it said, how do we work together to meet these unique issues? And, you know, one of the conversations that we had a couple of months ago where childcare came up and the demands that folks were seeing for childcare, a lot of the workforce board representatives said that this issue with childcare squarely sits with them in workforce development. How do we create better opportunities for individuals to consider that pathway? What Nate expressed, how do we create better job quality for those positions? You know, how do we get boards to engage in placing individuals in that space? How do we work with community-based organizations to create more opportunities? And so what we're seeing is workforce boards are recognizing how they can play a role in these conversations, and are absolutely trying to be a part of the table of these discussions to identify better career pathways, how to leverage earn and learn models, how to expand the supportive services that they're providing to the job seekers that are coming in their doors. Because you're absolutely right, it's very difficult to place someone in training if they don't have someone to watch their child. And so trying to be mindful of that effort and leveraging resources that you may come across, such as the Aspen Institute for Post-Secondary Success for students, who are very dialed into this effort of trying to create better opportunities and resources for student parents who are going through any type of higher education training. I think also from a workforce perspective, recognizing the need to create the stronger career pathways, as well as provide more support for individuals and parents, recognizing that the benefits cliff is real, and, you know, being mindful of that as you're helping to move someone through training and job placement, and creating those opportunities for them, you know, ensuring that their supports don't just fall off, that you are supporting them through their trajectory, I think is key. But there's a lot of opportunity, a lot of conversations that are happening now. I think Nate and Senator Bergen can agree that there's definitely been a lot more focus. And I think that's good. The pandemic has brought a lot of things to light, and I think we can't ignore those things anymore. And we're trying to find real solutions to address and meet that, so people can have the opportunity to have better lives and create better situations for their families.
Yeah, I really appreciate that. As we near the end of this conversation, we've got about 10 minutes left. So I think what I'd want to do is I've got one question for each of you that's a little different. And then we'll end on just like some 30-second wrap-ups, I think, as we finish. But Senator, I want to come back to you first, and then we'll go Nate and Kelly. Senator, a lot of the conversation we've heard is how technology has also transformed the way we have these discussions, particularly in the most recent years. And we know North Carolina spent a good amount of money to expand broadband internet for folks to make sure people are connected. What ways can we better use technology to create these pathways for workforce advancement?
I think there's things that we're going to be doing in the next 5 years that we haven't even talked about yet. Technology is changing so quickly now. I mean, think about the iPhone. We're on version 14 now. So go back 14 years, the iPhone didn't exist. And think about what all it does. And you know, I'm getting ready to update my latest one. And you know, and technology is fascinating. So I'm excited about what's going to happen. Broadband, by the time we get broadband to everybody, we won't even be using broadband. We'll be using something else. So that's something we all have to think about. But I want to say something to Nate and Kelly. I'm glad I know you all, because you all are going to be so important and be involved in what we're going to do to try to transform North Carolina job-wise, because I think our better days ahead of us on jobs. And you know, in right outside my district in Chatham County, VinFast is coming, and you know, it's going to be this huge electric car company from Vietnam that's coming in. So the community college that I'm finance chair of, we're going to be doing their training, and as we're talking to them about what it's going to look like, and the thousands of employees and the billions of dollars of investment, and you know, it's transforming all of Chatham County and Lee County and all the counties around it. Yeah, it's amazing. And so we're developing a big innovation center, and we're doing all of these things to prepare for that. And I look at that and I said, you know, why are we not doing this in other places too? So you know, these are exciting times in North Carolina and in business. And as a business guy, I say this many times, I don't spend money, I invest money. And I want to invest in workforce, because that's going to be the success for any business, is having great motivated workers that enjoy their jobs, you know, get that quality of life out of it. And I think that technology is going to allow us to do what we did back in the textile and furniture days, when people had whole careers with somebody. We've gotten away from that, but I think we can get back to that, where people will spend their career working with a company because they'll have so many different options.
Yeah, thank you for that. And I really appreciate you naming the innovation centers and things like that, because I think oftentimes the technology, we get lost in like the Wi-Fi or, you know, what's next. And it's realizing that it's going to change. And so setting up systems that allow us to do those developments and growth rather than one individual one-off here and there is really the next level of it. So, and you said earlier you don't think you'll ever be a teacher, but just because you're in the classroom doesn't mean we're not learning from you, Senator. So we really appreciate it.
I love these relationships, and I love getting to talk to people that are passionate about what they do, like your other guest.
We really appreciate it. Nate, I want to bring a question to you. We've talked a lot about community college and how that connection happens, but I don't know that we've necessarily touched on some of the other post-secondary institutions, like a 4-year. What role does a 4-year play in this workforce development as well?
Yeah, I think that's another fantastic question, and often we do end up talking a lot about our 2-year institutions. But the fact is that a student's experience, or the educational or career pathway, is fully comprehensive, right? And so whether we're talking about an English language learner or someone who's not yet finished their secondary credential, those pathways, when we're thinking about that, have to be the entire length of that path. And so we talked a lot today about some of the ways that this all fits together, but that particularly in North Carolina, there's a great example of this, of how 4-year institutions are plugged into this. Public Safety Administration is a fantastic 2-year degree pathway in North Carolina that was stood up over the last several years. That program was designed to facilitate an individual who had pursued a gateway credential, often on the non-credit bearing side of the house, to get credit towards a 2-year associate's degree that then immediately plugs in to NC State's Leadership in the Public Sector Baccalaureate program. That's an online statewide baccalaureate program. And then that articulates directly into a master's level program. So our senior institutions play a really critical role in being at that table to make sure that what we're building in our 2-year environment and in our credential environment can in fact plug into that pathway, again, being very cognizant of transferability of credit and recognition of prior learning. And I think one of the other encouraging things that we're seeing is that more and more four-year institutions are buying into the concept of what we call in our two-year world guided pathways or guided career pathways, which is that four-pronged approach of how do you make sure that you're getting students the information to get them on the pathway, supporting them while they're there, and making sure that they complete in that pathway, and then that we're studying and improving those pathways throughout the way. Georgia State is a fantastic example of a four-year institution that has embraced some of those principles that were tailored for two-year institutions and have seen just tremendous success in the, particularly in closing the equity gaps among populations that have historically been underserved. And so they play a very critical role there in making sure that we're again not finding those paths that end prematurely, right? And that they're plugging in and again, removing what I like to call removing the friction from that pathway. So that we're again being student-centered and understanding what their lived experience is going to be whenever the time comes that they are ready to keep moving down and moving up that pathway.
Yeah, thank you for that. And that's critical piece of it is how all this is connected and intertwined, and what's the right path for one student might not be the right path for another one. And so how we're providing all those different opportunities. Appreciate that. Kelly, I want to bring the question that came in through the Q&A to you about resources or examples, particularly for youth that have been from historically underrepresented populations, whether that's racially underrepresented or low socioeconomic status. What are some things you're seeing to support folks from these populations?
So underneath WIOA, there is a part of WIOA funds that are focused on youth. And so workforce boards do have a staff that are supporting and engaging youth in their communities, out of school youth and in school youth. So what we're seeing is a renewed focus on trying to address some of the disparities across skills attainment, basic skills, understanding and information for youth. The pandemic put a really strong light on some of the challenges that youth are facing beyond those that had been typically into play. And so, for example, in Shenandoah Valley, there's been a focus on youth apprenticeship. They've been working with local employers, advanced manufacturing, creating boot camps to provide those skills and training, and then placing them at employers for them and continuing to provide them support throughout that, because I think that's one of the things that a lot of workforce boards who are working and focusing with youth are finding, that there needs to be continual support. The youth right now feel very disconnected and disengaged. And so how do you keep them connected? How do you keep them engaged? And it's interesting, they've made a point to say that even though they are engaging through social media and TikTok and Twitter, that's not translating to actually feeling as if they are a part of the full society. And so there's been a lot of effort across different boards to try to get them to feel as if they're part of these conversations. There's work out in Ohio, and Easter Seals is doing some efforts working through apprenticeship and construction. There's also some efforts that are happening in the Michigan area and Connecticut. So overall, I think where we're seeing the most support is leveraging your community-based organizations to connect and reach out to the youth. They want a trusted voice. And so leveraging those individuals in their communities to help further your messaging around what offerings or services that you're providing. I think also creating and leveraging the supportive services and resources beyond just the typical transportation. There's quite a bit of youth that are in need of housing, and quite a bit of youth that are in need of support from academic standpoint. So really going deep in the bench with the resources that you have in your possession, but also leveraging other entities to try to supplement that. I think in addition to that, really working with employers to understand and help them understand the new generations that are coming in. We're finding that there has been a lot of conversations with employers of how best to provide the support of the new youth that are entering into their buildings, and creating those types of mentorship programs, either through apprenticeship or through other work-based learning opportunities. That seems to be another piece of the puzzle that workforce boards and other entities are really leveraging. So I hope that answered some of the question. But yes, we definitely realize that there's a renewed focus on youth right now, and there's also new investments that are coming into the field for youth. And so there's new developments that are coming out. Workforce GPS, which is the U.S. Department of Labor's website, has quite a bit of resources on youth, as well as NATE and JFF have done some excellent work in the youth space. And so I would highly recommend you checking out those two websites. I think you'll be surprised at some of the pieces of information and resources that have been developed over the last couple of months, actually.
This has been excellent. Thank you so much for those resources, Kelly. And thank you everyone for the work you've all done in this field. We're only scratching the surface of this workforce advancement conversation, but I hope all those in attendance, please continue to utilize the resources these panelists have put in front of you, as well as the resources that are listed on the website. But thank you again, panelists, for this conversation. Just want to do a few reminders as we close out this discussion with participants, but as you're all probably aware, NAEP scores came out not too long ago, and we're not the best. And so next Tuesday, we've pulled together a panel for a great discussion on what the use of NAEP scores in a post-COVID era looks like. So really hope you'll join us. That's next Tuesday at 2 o'clock. And then we'll be back in December for our next post-secondary pathways, looking at assessing post-secondary student success. Oftentimes student success is thrown around, but we really don't define what we mean by success. So looking forward to having a great conversation about what success truly means. Again, Senator Bergen, Nate, Kelly, really appreciate you all taking your time to share all your wealth of knowledge with us. And please let us know how the Hunt Institute can continue to be a partner and support you in your work. But thank you for your time, audience. Thanks for being here, and we look forward to the next one.